Yo, what's up everybody?
Welcome to our channel. We're Peter and Yin, travel vloggers from New Zealand. And after spending over a month here, we thought we'd share some tips and things to know based on our experience as a Kiwi Asian couple traveling throughout this country.
Yeah, we've been here since the end of April all the way through to the start of early June, and we've had a fantastic time exploring Morocco with all its unique beauties. So full of colour, culture and history. We've had some unforgettable experiences here.
Yes, we have. So without further ado, let's jump into this list.
Getting here is pretty straightforward, at least from other European countries. We took a budget air flight from Ryanair, which took us direct from Rome over to Fez. But any of the main big cities here in Morocco are pretty well connected to other European cities.
You'll find that Arabic and French are the languages most predominantly spoken here. English is common too, but less so than French. We always recommend learning a couple of phrases in whichever foreign country you go to because it really does enrich your experience. So for here, you can learn Arabic such as Salamu Alaikum, which is a greeting that you can use any time of day, and also Shukran, which is thank you. Of main mobile providers here, which are Maroc, Orange, Meditel and Inwi. So we went with Maroc, and the coverage we found was really good, whether we were up in the high Atlas Mountains or the narrow streets of Fez wandering around through the Medina. However, it is all in French or Arabic though, so it can be a little tricky. We even had a few connectivity issues at the start, but once we sorted through all that, it was fine. So I'm going to leave a couple of tips in the description below because it's a bit too much to cover just in this talking here. But you'll also find that when you get to the airport, they're often handing out free Orange SIMs. So we're not sure if that's a better provider. If anyone knows, let us know in the comments below so that you can help other travelers. But yes, we very much found that Maroc was a good provider, and if you can, avoid getting it at the airport because it costs about 15 to 30 euros and it can come with a lot of unnecessary things in the packages. So instead, when we got to Fez, our wonderful Riyadh manager, Murad, helped us to buy a SIM card from the actual Maroc store. And in terms of topping up, you can do it yourself by using these little scratch cards, just texting it to a number, and then it will confirm that you've got the internet data on. But otherwise, you can do it through like a self-service kiosk. But again, it is in French, so it's just something that you've got to navigate around if you're going with Maroc. It cost us about half the price than getting it from the airport, so it's a huge saving there. And if you need to top up, that's also really easy because you can either get it from those self-service kiosks or any of the little hole-in-the-wall stores that you see in the souks and the Medinas will usually sell them too. All you need to tell them is internet, and then they'll ask you how much in dirhams. Normally it's around a 20, 30 or 50 dirham that you can buy. Scratch the little card and then text that number and it will top up to your phone. And one last tip on this topic is that they call gigabytes gigs here instead of gigs. And it's also written as GO instead of GB if you're seeing the text update.
Now getting currency here is pretty straightforward. The local currency is known as Moroccan dirhams, otherwise short form MAD, but what you'll see on the menus and stores and things like that is DH. Now what you could do is bring euros or dollars or whatever it is and change it at a money converter, but we found that the exchange rate isn't the best. So a better way is to get an international debit card, something like a Wise card, and going to one of the local ATMs and withdrawing money. There is a slight currency exchange fee, but there's also an ATM fee on top of that, which is normally around 30 dirhams. And a very good note is to, once you've gotten those big notes, the 200 and 100 dirhams, go to somewhere and buy like a water or something and get change, because you'll need the 20s and also the coins for tips as well as to access the public bathrooms. Now, chances are if you're coming to Morocco, then you are definitely going to catch a taxi at some point. And what we found is that in the small towns, it's pretty easy catching a taxi. They'll charge you a pretty normal rate, and also they're quite friendly as well. However, if you go and catch a taxi in one of the big cities, it's a totally different ball game. So we found that taxis in the big cities can be often at times a little bit ridiculous, and if they see that you're a foreigner, they could charge you up to 2 to 5 times more than what a standard rate might be. So we've used the apps such as Heech, Kareem, or InDriver to find the standard rates of how much a 10-minute ride should be, and normally it's around about 30 dirhams, and we've used this at a starting negotiating baseline. But yeah, often it's a lot more, and even if you insist for them to use a meter, they're probably going to be saying, nah, no chance of that. Also, from talking to various other foreigners who visited Marrakesh at the same time as us, we found that if they stayed at a very nice hotel, then what sometimes could happen is they'll take you around to places like their friends' shops or things like that, expecting you to buy something. So if that does happen to you, very good practice is to stay inside the taxi and just be like, nah, I'm not getting out. Take us to our hotel right now. Or if you want to avoid that altogether, you could just take them to take you to a landmark that's near your hotel instead and just walk that little distance over there. Also, if you're negotiating the price for your taxi, make sure that includes every single occupant of that taxi. And what we've often found is that taxi drivers can sometimes be like at the end of the ride, okay, so now that's 50 dirhams for you and another 50 dirhams for you when you expected to pay only 50 dirhams in the first place. They're now charging you 100. So make sure that's really clear. And also, if you're getting into one of the ride-sharing vehicles, make sure that it's a little bit away from where all the taxi drivers are, because the ride-sharing drivers, they're a little bit afraid of what's known as the taxi mafia here. And so if the taxi drivers see that you're getting into a ride-sharing car, sometimes they can be very angry at the drivers. And so what you often find is they might want to drop you off out of sight of where all the other taxi drivers are.
They'll get you close, but maybe not directly in front.
Yeah, that's right. Now, staying on the topic of taxis, there's one more big thing to know, and that is about the shared taxis. So if you're getting one of these, then what you'll say is, hey, I want to go to this destination, and don't be surprised if the driver is like waiting for more people to fill up the car that they've got. And also don't be surprised if you're driving there and all of a sudden they stop to pick up additional passengers. Currently in a shared taxi, so here's the situation. Lots of people. Yes. All going all kinds of places.
There's 3 of us in the back here too. Well, Jim.
That is the idea of a shared taxi. You'll usually get a better rate, but you'll have to share the vehicle that you're in. Also, another thing to note is that it doesn't matter if you're traveling as one person or a group of, say, 3 people. They'll give you the same price. And so if you're the driver, what you'll often find is that the driver wants to take more individual people, because that means they can make 3 times the amount of, say, a group of 3. And also, if you're traveling in a group of 3, that can make it very difficult for you to actually hail down a cab driver or even negotiate with the driver to take you somewhere. Often what you'll need to do is pay them more and say, okay, we'll pay you more, just take us to this spot, and then it will be all right.
The infrastructure to get around the cities, even the remote ones, is pretty good here. And that's by using the CTM buses. You can buy the tickets at the station, or you can buy them online, but it's cheaper getting them at the station. If you've got large luggages, then these need to be checked in, and you can do that on the day of travel itself. You'll be issued some bag tags, which you just put onto your bags. And if you've got backpacks, they can fit into the overhead shelves on the bus too.
Now, another form of transport in between the big cities, especially like Marrakech, Casablanca, and Fez, Rabat, is catching a train, and that's a lot faster than getting a CTM bus. But there is one important thing to note about it, and that is if you're expecting to buy the tickets on the day, then you can also expect to find very long queues of people all thinking the same thing. So what you might want to do instead is purchase a ticket online. It is a little bit more expensive, or what Yen and I did was we went a day in advance and queued up for about almost an hour and purchased our tickets face to face, and you save that little bit of extra money, which is also very helpful. And once you do get onto the train, which runs very punctually, actually the buses also run very punctually, is that you can find there's a lot of space. There's first and second class, and even the train ticket seller was telling us that There's not really much difference between the two classes. There's a lot of areas to put your luggages as well as your bags on the overhead parts too. And if you don't want to catch a train or a bus, then what you could do is hire a car. That's what we found is it typically costs around about 50 euros per day, but of course that charge varies depending on what kind of car you take or what kind of insurance options that you take as well. Another way is you can get a group tour or you can get a private tour. Private tours we found were typically around about the 200 to 300 New Zealand dollar range, and it doesn't matter how many people that go in the car as long as you pay that price. And group tours, well, they can depend on what kind of group activity you're doing. We found in general the tour operators that we went with were punctual, reliable, and just generally look for the ones with better reviews, and you probably won't go wrong.
Many of the Moroccans who we met here were incredibly warm, welcoming and friendly, and a lot of them even went out of their ways to make us feel very well taken care of and made us feel like we were at home too. So we want to say again a big thank you to all our friends who we've made along the way. Morocco is an incredibly lively and atmospheric place, and so it's common to also hear live music and see performances in the street. Even if you're just listening outside of your accommodation, you might hear people coming down the street with music too. And of course, the food. You've got to try all the popular foods here, like the tagines and the soups, the harira, couscous as well. And also have that famous Moroccan mint tea, where you can add a lump of sugar, and if you're lucky, they'll pour it for you the traditional way too.
Another cultural norm here in Morocco is negotiating, and it's a very big part of life here, especially if you're a tourist. If you go into the souks or if you're going to catch a taxi, negotiations are definitely expected. So if you don't want to get ripped off, I highly recommend that you work on the negotiating skills. If someone says a price, mark it down 2 times, 3 times, it's okay, because you can always build your way up, you can't build your way back down. And so if you're going into the shops, another common thing that you might see happen to you is a shop vendor will approach you and say, hello, how are you doing? And then they'll be talking to you, ask where you're from, and they'll be like, oh, I know so-and-so from this very random part of the city that you're in. So like, we're from New Zealand, and they'll be like, we know someone from Stewart Island. And like, most Kiwis don't even know someone from Stewart Island because it's so small. And then once they get you into that conversation, they'll be like, oh, come into my shop, have some mint tea, have a look at these wares. And then sooner or later, they're going to be expecting you to buy something. And at that point, things might turn a little bit more aggressive even in terms of their negotiations. Like, hey, why are you coming to the store and you haven't bought anything? You got to buy this now. And so if you don't feel comfortable with any of that, then I definitely recommend that you stand your ground and say, no, thank you. No, thank you is very good. And you might even want to learn in Arabic as well. La shukran, 2 words that are very important and useful. Now, before I get into this next part, I do want to remind you guys that Yen and I are Kiwis. We're from New Zealand, and so culturally it's very different from Morocco. So I say this from a good place. I want other people who visit Morocco not to have culture shock. And also I understand economically there's quite a big disparity from what I've seen between the rich and the poor. And so if you go into certain areas like Medinas and also touristic areas where there aren't many touristic police, you can get quite a lot of street hustlers who are just trying to make a quick buck. But you can totally understand because of that economic disparity. And so what you'll find is as you're walking through the Medinas, or if you're walking around just exploring on your own, you'll find a lot of unofficial guides. And so these can be children as well, or they can be young adults or even older people, and they'll try and lead you places, and they'll be very friendly at first, but then once they come to the end of that tour, and I say tour very loosely because sometimes it could be just a couple of minutes, they will demand that you give them some money, or they could lead you into a very far location where there's a whole bunch of their friends, and once again they'll demand for some money. And if you're not used to this, it can feel a little bit intimidating, but I can assure you Morocco is a very safe place. We didn't feel any kind of violent threat or anything like that. They're just trying to make a quick buck. In Essaouira, we were actually taken around by one of these guides to the blue boats and things, and we took a bunch of really nice photos, which is actually all good because Yen and I were wondering whether or not we were able to film there or take photos there anyway, and so it turned out to be a cool experience. He charged us a very high price at the start, but once again, bringing you back to the negotiations part of it, you can negotiate the prices down even if it's one of these guides, and so we got it for about half of the price that was originally asked for. But some people will say things to you like, oh, do you want to go to my mum's restaurant? It's just over here, and they'll take you to the restaurant. It's free, but once you get into the restaurant and have your meal, what you'll find is another family member of that original person who took you there is going to ask for a tip, and also the restaurant could be extremely expensive as well. So yeah, just some things to know.
Speaking of the Medinas, that's where you often find the souks or the marketplaces, and these can often be filled with narrow, winding streets and be quite a labyrinth, but it'll also be filled with lots of fun shopping and sights and smells, so it's definitely worth visiting. As long as you just, stay a bit alert and be cautious that there could be potential pickpocketers and just be aware about all those different hustlers that Peter mentioned, then you'll be all good. If you are a bit hesitant regardless still though, you can always hire a guide, an official one, and you can get either your hotel or riad manager to recommend you one, or sometimes you can find them through things like Airbnb experiences. But yeah, we highly recommend it, and it is quite a fun experience in itself.
Now, if we're talking accommodation here in Morocco, of course you got your luxury hotels, but on the other end you also have your hostels. But in between, we highly recommend staying at a riad or a dar, which is basically like a traditional home here in Morocco. They're really cool. Sometimes you even have like a courtyard in the center, but it's basically a traditional home that's been converted into a place of accommodation now. What you often find though is that often these riads or dars are located deep inside a Medina, and so what we do recommend is that you book the accommodation transport service, which will basically organize with the hotel manager or the riad manager a way to get from wherever terminal that you arrive in all the way to the riad, and sometimes that even might involve someone coming in with a cart and putting your luggages on top of it and getting through the narrow streets over to your accommodation. It's a lot less stressful than you trying to figure out how to navigate your way over to your accommodation, especially with the hustlers telling you where to go at every single corner. So it can just save you a lot of trouble.
Staying in dars and riads is a great experience, but they were designed to be large family homes. So what you'll have is a room within one of these large homes with a ton of other guests around too. So if you're a light sleeper, that can sometimes be a bit of an issue because of people and other guests coming home at all times of the night, and because of the wooden doors you might hear a bit of a racket, so that's just something to keep in mind. And also the daily call to prayer from the mosques can often be heard too. It's throughout the day, but very often in the early mornings as well, so that's something that you'll need to just get used to, especially if you've never been to an Islamic country before.
So I gotta say, this whole Morocco trip has felt like an absolute adventure.
It sure has, and we've also made a ton of great friends along the way, even despite language barriers, but we're incredibly grateful for them.
Yeah, it's been a blast, and also we've got a bunch of other videos from Morocco, so do check them out.
Yeah, and if you found this video useful because you're planning on visiting or thinking about coming here to Morocco, we hope that you'll give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, leave us a comment. We love hearing from you.
Yeah, it's not an exhaustive list, so if you do have additional tips, leave them down below.
Please do, and we'll catch you guys in the next vlog.
See ya.
Bye.